thunders mutter, northern flags and south winds flutter. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Send them back your fierce defiance, stamp upon the cursed alliance. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Advance the flag of Dixie. Hurrah, hurrah, for Dixie's land we take our stand and live or die for Dixie. To arms, to arms, and conquer peace for Dixie. To arms, and conquer peace for Dixie. Fear no danger, shun no labor, lift up rifle, pike, and saber. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Shoulder pressing close to shoulder, let the odds make each heart bolder. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Advance the flag of Dixie. Hurrah, hurrah, for Dixie's land we take our stand and live or die for Dixie. To arms, and conquer peace for Dixie. To arms, and conquer peace for Dixie. Swear upon your country's altar never to submit or falter. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Till the spoilers are defeated, till the Lord's work is completed. To arms, to arms, to arms in Dixie. Advance the flag of Dixie. Hurrah, hurrah, for Dixie's land we take our stand and live or die for Dixie. To arms, and conquer peace for Dixie. To arms, and conquer peace for Dixie.
And conquer peace for Dixie indeed. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I know that it is big-time election season, and I know that many of you are probably sick to death of the last several days of memes and constant coverage of the election season here in the United States. I'm sick of it myself. And tonight I thought we would take a break from that to speak about something positive, something healthy, something good. Something real as opposed to the fake and gay voting show that's happening right now. And that is going to come to you in the form of a wonderful discussion with a nice young man I've met by the name of j.buden. Now, before we get started, I'd like to let you guys know we have him for about an hour, like usual, when I do these interviews. And if you would like to ask questions to my wonderful guest or myself about my guest, you can do so over on Entropy. If you would like to give me dollars while you do that, I would deeply appreciate it. You can send paid chats on Odyssey with hyper chat features. You can send them on Entropy via Entropy paid chats. And of course, you can send paid messages on my PayPal and my Subscribestar. But of course, we prefer Entropy. And if you like to use your phone, you can use Cash App. I have an active Cash App, and you're more than welcome to send short messages that way. But the messages, of course, have to be short. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring on my guest for tonight. j.buden, thank you for being with me tonight. How are you doing this evening?
Thanks for inviting me back on, Yes. I'm glad to speak to you.
Excellent. Glad to speak to you, too. For those of you who don't know, I had a wonderful conversation with Jay recently on his channel, and just last night, he was on Discordant Dragons, and we had a lovely time. But tonight, we're doing something a little more cordial, a little more serious. j.buden is a likable, he's not a stick in the mud, but he is a serious young man, and he has serious conversations on his channel. And before I get started with my interview questions, I wanted to talk about why I named the stream what I did. Those of you that are my longtime followers, you will know I've been using the phrase keep heart for a very long time. I used it before I even was a public voice. The reason why I say keep heart and that keeping heart is important is because the people who want to strip you of identity and turn you into a materialist slave, into a husk of what a man should be, they want that flame in you to go out. They want to blow out the flame of hope, the flame that drove our ancestors to adventure, to conquer, to explore, and to build Christendom to the glory of God, to the glory of what makes us bigger than just being beasts of flesh and primal needs. They want that flame extinguished. And we can't let that happen. you must deny them that victory because only you can choose to let that flame go out. And so, keeping heart with j.buden is going to be not just talking to him to let you guys get to know him, but because he inspires me. He's an intelligent, moral young man who cares about his country, his people, and doing what's right. And men like him, the dozens I've met across this once great country, inspire me to keep heart and to keep doing what I'm doing. So, with that being said, j.buden, tell me why it is that, or I'm sorry, tell me who you are first of all. Let's start with that. Tell my audience who you are and what led you to having the public persona that you have now.
All right. So as far as my basic background goes, I'm from Virginia. I'm from a small town, kind of right in the middle of it, and kind of one of the capitals of the Bible Belt. And so I grew up in a very kind of traditional red state. I'm not going to pretend to be this like working class hero. Like my family had plenty of money. I was lucky enough to go to a fairly unique private school. I actually talked about this with AA just yesterday, where I was lucky enough to go to a place where I was essentially taught the Western canon, right? So taught the classics, taught the Christian scholastic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so that primed me to be interested in these things. And not only did I learn things there that were, later very useful to me and kind of pushed me in this direction ideologically, but I also met a lot of people who were interested in the same things that we are. Even if less explicitly, these are kind of the conversations being had. And so even at a relatively young age, I was engaging with topics like these. And
Brilliant.
while I was there, because I graduated high school in 2017, so I'm 23 years old. And so going through high school during the whole Trump thing, it kind of changed how everyone saw politics. Because like many people on this side of things, I am incredibly disagreeable. Like I hate to admit how often my opinions are kind of formed by what does everyone else not think, like anti-current thing, essentially. And so in kind of high school and early college, I did go through a little bit of a shitlib phase, more out of just reaction than anything else. But with Trump, and then later my first year of college, which was incredibly influential to me, I kind of realized, like, wait a minute, like this isn't working.
Right.
And my friend George Bagby, who I've had on my show several times now, and now he's a long-term friend of mine, but he was the history and literature teacher at this school. So I had him a lot in school, and he was an old school reactionary. So he'd been involved with Abbeville. He'd been involved with, Moldbug when he was first writing kind of in the Obama era.
Ooh.
And in addition to him, I had other influences that I would consider kind of older millennials. So people who kind of came of age during the Ron Paul era. And so those were all people that kind of shepherded me towards, where we are now. And really what I can describe as like the real radicalization moment for me, because I had these priors, but like everyone else who's like 15 to 19, you're a moron, and you kind of just think like, oh,
Right.
my peers are stupid. Like I can blaze my own way. But I went off to school and I was, a smart kid. I didn't have the best grades, but I did well enough to get into a pretty prestigious, private school in Virginia, University of Richmond.
Nice.
And when I went there, I was kind of expecting the part of college and this part of like a liberal arts school that you're sold, like, oh, this is the best and brightest that you're really gonna, this is where you're gonna go to make something of yourself. And I went there and I was incredibly, incredibly disturbed by what I found. So I've told this story before, and so anyone from my channel has probably heard it.
Well, I'd love to hear it again.
Oh yeah, sure. So when I went there, the school had very recently had a Me Too scandal, which from everything I've read seems to be a real one, right? It seems that there have been a series of rapes on campus that were obviously, I stand here as a proud, I realize this is a controversial opinion, anti-rape activist, but nonetheless, right, it was an actual serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like in many cases, we see a problem being exploited very cynically by political actors. And so what happened is that the school, which had, like many other small schools, used to be a seminary, just a few decades ago, had basically been transformed into something like out of, like a 2016 SJW video. And
Tragic.
they sent us so it was a small school. I think our incoming class was around 800. So it's 400 men and women, roughly speaking. And they
Hmm.
took all 400 men and essentially stuffed them in a giant auditorium with a comically overweight butch feminist. And our college orientation was 8 days long, which is unusually long. It was essentially like an ideological struggle session. And this
Yep.
just threw me for a loop. I was not prepared for this at all because in my mind, I was still kind of existing in the world where, oh, politics is something funny on the internet, right? I missed Trump's first election by a few weeks. I couldn't vote in it. And so essentially, politics was either it was Obama era politics in which the Democrats always win no matter what. So why should you care?
Hmm.
The conservatives just cope constantly. Or
Hmm.
it's early Trump politics, which is wait a minute, everything's funny now. Like this is stupid. Like I can't take anything seriously. To it went to like, oh wait, these people are going to lock me in a room, and literally tell me they literally did the thing where it's like look to your right, look to your left. One of those people is a rapist.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And that's like especially
I had to go through a similar thing in my career. Not to showbiz you here, but before I lost my career and got ran out of the city I lived in, they required all of us to go to this anti-racist training, and all of us who were white had to step forward and basically be named and shamed for being evil oppressors. It was a very similar experience in my workplace, and that was a huge eye-opening for me. This was back in 2016.
No, definitely. Because it felt like this is, oh, you are willing to enact force on me. You're willing to actually like make my life hell if I don't do what you want. And it culminated at the end in a ceremony, which I've told before, but I think because I did a stream recently with Prude and Cody Browning off Twitter, where I went through I went through this story and found one of my professors who we'll get to later.
Hmm.
Where it culminated in a ceremony where essentially in this old, beautiful old chapel, which had all the old religious iconography, chiseled off of it, there was kind of this secularized Muslim man at the front of it who was very clear about the fact that he was Muslim and this old desecrated church. And he made us, on condition of us entering the university, sign a document which featured the phrase, I will challenge and upend the tenets of traditional Western masculinity.
Oh my God,
I know,
that's
and this was relatively early, right? This would have been the fall of 2017. So obviously post
wow.
Trump and post Charlottesville, but still,
Yeah.
a different world. And I'm ashamed to say that I signed it, right? Like, and after that, and through another class I had there, I really kind of started the same pipeline that a lot of people did.
Yeah.
So the way that the school worked is there's a problem in higher ed where undergraduates cannot write. I was better than average at writing. I'm not going to pretend I'm an amazing scholar, but I was competent. And so to me this was not a problem, but for other people it was. And
Hmm.
so what they'll do is they just flat out mandate, no matter what your priors are, no matter if you test it out, you have to take a freshman level writing course. But they kind of want to sneak it in. And so what they tell you is, oh, you get an elective, a freshman level elective, where you get to pick whatever you want. And so I had a list of probably, 50 different courses I could choose, very small
Okay.
classes. And I was in business school and I saw one that said game theory. So I'm like, oh, great. Economic game theory, prisoner's dilemma, stuff like that. Okay, that,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And what I had actually signed up for was a critical theory of video games class.
Oh no.
And so what this class
Are you
essentially,
talking like Anita Sarkeesian
yes, this was a
and
class on Gamergate. So I
yeah.
found out about Gamergate in a college setting, and it
Oh
was
my
taught
God.
it from an actual large, blue-haired feminist. And so weirdly enough, it kind of like,
That's like if Babylon B wrote that.
no, 100%. It's funny when I went back on that stream with Saddam, who's a member of my community.
Yeah.
He's friends with Paul
Hmm.
too. He works in academia, and so he has a JSTOR account, and we were able to find out a lot about this woman. And we found out that not only has she published a lot on Gamergate in an academic setting, but if you had to guess, what do you think her other job is in addition to being a professor?
Let me guess. She is some kind of journalist for some shitty leftoid rag.
Oh, she also does that, but I don't think she actually gets money for it. It's even
Oh.
dumber. She is a professional, and I mean for 10 years, a professional clown, literally. And
Oh,
so,
that's rich. That is rich. Let's
and
get
so,
the clown emoji in chat and a honk for
yeah, literally, literal clown world. And so it kind of put me in the space where all of a sudden I went from being in a situation where I was very sheltered from this. And this is something that I think was really a blessing, to kind of in the belly of the beast. And it really did throw me for a spin. And so I kind of got taken from being, kind of not apolitical. Like I think I have, no matter what, a right wing contrarian personality.
I
But
think people like us are born that way. I don't think there's
I
any
do too.
getting rid of that.
And so what essentially had happened, I went from being kind of a contrarian in a conservative setting. It was a lot of the people there were kind of old right figures. I mean, people who were kind of, reading a lot of pre-World War II, right wing thinkers, but there was also a pretty big, contingent of just generic, like red state Americans.
Uh-huh.
And obviously I felt a little bit rebellious just because personality wise, like I don't like, agreeing with the consensus. And so I was completely kind of clotheslined by that. And so what happened is, after I ended up dropping out of school, went back to community college, finished quick, and then, got my 4-year degree somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
And kind of that course of the next, 3 years of my life were really kind of an accelerated version of a path that's pretty common to people in these fields. So I've actually been reading Moldbug and reading a lot of the NRX guys like Spandrel from a pretty early age, but I couldn't really mesh that with my, my Christian priors.
Uh-huh.
Because I mean, to me at least, I couldn't find a way that you could get those to coexist. And kind of, it was a slow process of admitting more and more the kind of like, 2016 liberal centrism just wasn't going to work, no matter how much I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And so really it was a slow process. And I credit people, like the distributist and Aaron McIntyre, who really helped me make that journey. And so what happened is,
They
I
helped
got
me a lot too. I like both of those men you just mentioned.
yeah,
They've helped me understand certain threads of how this is all woven together. They've done a lot of good work that I've helped to improve myself with.
right. I consider two of them two of our best. Excuse me. And so essentially what happened is, as I got further and further along, I kind of felt like, well, there are questions I want to ask. There's something I want to add. And so that kind of involved a few tentative, I guess, like, moves into this space. And really what happened is, I kind of owe this to Paul Fahrenheit, because I live very close to where Paul Fahrenheit used to go to college.
Uh-huh.
And so we were in the basket weaving Discord, and I had put up there like, hey, I drive back and forth along this route, twice a week. I was going to school in Blacksburg at the time, and I was living, a few days a week in Richmond. So I was driving up and down, 8164.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't really close to where he lives, but it's close enough that, if you're like, all right, I'll spend an afternoon with someone. And so Paul and I ended up talking for, well into the night. And at the end, I'd kind of floated this idea, like, yeah, I was thinking about having a podcast. He's like, you should do it. And so with his encouragement, that's really where I started my first episode from. Essentially, it was, well, these people are interesting. I want to ask them questions that I personally, when I'm, listening to these conversations, there are moments I want to interject. And so at first I'd kind of thought like, well, maybe I'll be a writer. And I kind of realized very quickly that while I'm a competent writer, there are people in our circles who are vastly better than me at writing. There's no two ways about it. And okay, fair enough. I could spend a ton of time, working at that and maybe be as good as them. Or I can fill a niche, which I think that obviously there are other interview shows. Like, I think like Pete's great. Alex Kashoot is great.
Yeah,
But I
they're
was like,
both great.
okay.
I love Pete. I got to meet him down at the Mises Institute earlier this year. He's a cool guy.
Oh, lucky. Yeah. Pete's been very kind to me, and he's a huge influence on my thought. It's funny. I found Pete when he and I were in very similar circumstances. I had been kind of on an Austrian economics kick, and then COVID happened, and I was like, well, what the
Pete
hell?
and I are about the same age. We're both Gen Xers, and we had a lot in common. We got on really well together, and I've also learned a lot from his podcast. He has a lot of material going back like a decade. He's got a lot of good stuff.
He really does. He's been around these spheres for a while, and I'm really impressed with his output. It's funny, we can get into this later, but I do feel like there is a Gen X, Gen Z kind of simpatico.
Yeah. We're
and
tight
it's like,
together. Yeah.
somehow it works. And I'm
Yeah, it
not
does.
the
Speaking
humor is
of,
the same.
Pete is actually my next corner club guest. I'll be talking to him on here in a week or two.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
I obviously, Pete's podcast is great, and I'm sure that'll be a good show. I'll be sure to tune in.
cool.
Uh, and so essentially, it was kind of this slow realization that, like, okay, well, there are things that maybe I don't want to be true, but nonetheless, they are. And so I think, like a lot of people, I kind of had these series of sliding realizations that, like, the rules of the game as presented to you in high school civics class, kind of
Mhm.
the directions written on the box. You have been given a losing hand. Like
Right.
you've been
You've
given the
also been
part.
fed false information about how it's all supposed to work too.
Exactly. Like you are
Mhm.
set up to lose. And so
Yes.
there's a certain point where it's like, well, if someone's told you, hey, look, Lucy's going to pull the football away again. Like, okay, maybe the first time you're like, no, I don't think so. I don't want to think so. Because everyone says, like, I'll get the football. I'll kick it this time.
Yeah.
But then you have it like, okay, you've whiffed once, and that person's still standing there, like, hey, look, like Charlie, like she's going to pull the football again. It's going to happen again. And after a while, like you kind of just realize, like if you're any type of thinker, you look up and you're like, well, wait a minute, like it doesn't really matter if I don't want this to be true. It's panning out or it's not panning out. And so it was kind of this slow like realization that kind of the people that have been incredibly influential in my life, like Bagby and a few others who I haven't mentioned by name. Well, one, they were right, and two, it's like, okay, well that means that if they're right, if the just vote the bums out method isn't working, like we need to kind of cast our nets wider. And so when we're like that combination of reading more and kind of looking for more dissident voices really pushed me out. And then to go back to what I said about, kind of feeling like I had something to say and something to add. And then kind of like looking, well, okay, like maybe this is an overly economic way of looking at it, but like where's a niche that could be filled? Like what is something I can do? And so when it came to interviews, it's like, well, I like talking to people. Like I can essentially talk all day and I enjoy having conversations. And so the ability to be like, wait a minute, I can actually turn something I want to do anyway, which is talk to these people, turn it into a show that kind of justifies itself, because it's a little bit
Mhm.
hard to say like, hey, look, I know you're a busy guy. Can I just call you on the phone for an hour? That's a little harder to sell than, hey, look, here's a show and maybe some people
Yeah.
watch
Well,
it.
this is a good point to segue then, if you don't mind. You clearly have a gift of being able to speak. You have the gift of gab, as we say in the South. You have a particular penchant for being naturally resistant to the things that we are all against. And I think that you made the right choice in creating a public voice and a method through which you can connect with those who not just inspire you, but whom you want to learn more from. I think that's really good. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here, because that's why I got started too. Is I can write okay, not the best. I'm pretty smart, but not properly educated. But I'm really good at networking and talking to people, doing interviews, asking people questions, and I'm good at public speaking as well. So I decided that maybe I should take all that I've learned and experienced and try to do something positive to let others learn from my experiences and my failures, as well as meet people that I like and am inspired by. So you and I are very similar in what led us to being a public voice like this. It's cool to get to know that about you. But let's go ahead and segue to the thing I wanted to talk about for the middle of the stream here, which is why I called the stream Keeping Heart. And it's what we talked about just before we went live. For those of you that might have tuned in a little bit late, I called it Keeping Heart because keep heart is something I've said for a very long time. And you and I both agree that what our oppressor, enemy, tyrant group wants from us is for us to give up and for the flame to go out in us. They want us to be soulless. They want us to be godless. They want us to have no connection to history or heritage or race or ethnicity or anything that matters. They don't want us to build strong insular communities. They don't want us to have our own businesses and pathways of trade. They don't want us to have churches. They want us all to just be rootless, soulless slaves that they can control through material need. Like they want us to be bugmen that live on a healthy diet of insect food and pornography. So, why don't you speak to that and what you have felt like being a young man growing up in the ashes of our civilization? Speak to me about the importance of keeping heart and elaborate on some of the points that I just made in ways that you would say it to someone younger than you.
Yeah. So what I think that we've seen is the promise of, of liberalism. And I think we have to own this, that many of our kind of founding myths are based in this, is this
Yes.
idea that if I get to decide, then it's okay. If I have the freedom to choose whatever I want, then I'll be happy. And I think what we've seen is more and more that there's almost no correlation between your ability to choose and your happiness and function at any basic level. Because
Especially
really,
when the choices laid out for us are all poison.
well, right. And I think that what at least I've seen is that there really is something kind of paradoxical about this. And I think that look, I'm not Orthodox, but I think the Orthodox have a very good understanding of kind of like the inherent, I don't want to say inherent contradictions, but kind of the mysteries of of Christ and theology. And so there is this kind of dynamic tension between control and freedom, and that really, like, you do need to have self-control to be free. You need to deny yourself in order to be truly free.
Yes.
And that's a much older conception of freedom. And this kind of debate,
because chaos isn't freedom. Having order allows
right,
personal
right.
freedom, not chaos. Right.
And we kind of talked about this last night when it came to, some other ideas. But as we've seen kind of this society die, these ideas have become debased versions of themselves. Because when you talk about freedom, that's a really deep concept. There's a lot to explore there. But when freedom just becomes the, I'm free to drink a ton of beer and be really fat and watch a lot of porn. It's like, okay, well, you have made a choice there, but you're essentially making a choice to make yourself, like weak, flabby, and miserable, which on one hand, yes, you made that choice, but you're limiting yourself so much by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing I think that we need to kind of explain to people, and this is like the first thing that really like broke through to me, and this is why I, despite everything else, can't, be too harsh on Peterson, is this idea that, like, wait a minute, like if you want to be, truly free, if you want to be in control of yourself, you're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to give something up. And I think that there's this lie that you can have it all. And we see this very clearly with women, right? The idea that you can have both the career and the family. You can be the girl boss, you can be everything all at once. And again, maybe this is just my business background when it comes to things like economics, but we live in a world of finite resources and there are trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of an uncomfortable thing to realize, that, wait a minute, you do have to give something up. And I think that's the idea behind that, in order to live, or in order to have eternal life, you must die to yourself. And so my point in this digression is not to just, stroke my own ego. It's to say, like, there's something really poisonous in modernity. I think that human nature is a relative constant, right? We can get better, we can get worse. There are societies that are better and worse, but no matter how well a society is governed, people are going to do bad things, right? So we're not utopians here. But nonetheless, I would argue that in addition to kind of just baseline human depravity, the things that we do wrong in normal context, there's an additional layer of just poison coming from modernity. And it's this idea of just kind of like boundless personal choice. I'm not going to say freedom, but boundless personal choice. But it's the personal choice of essentially, like, what pleasure machine do you want to hook your brain up to? And so there's these ideas.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. And there's this idea, and it's utilitarian, right? That the only thing that makes something, right or wrong is essentially like care or harm. So is someone made happy by this? Is someone hurt by this? And then there's a further conflation that's kind of snuck in the door that I see a lot of people, myself included, make, that pleasure and freedom are the same thing. And so essentially you have the system where any constraint on you is evil, something to be thrown off, something to be cast off. Where the only end in your life is personal pleasure. The only thing that matters is kind of like your here and now. Mm-hmm. And we have people for whom they're told this, and I feel a great deal of sympathy. But what they don't realize is that this kind of like deeper freedom and deeper satisfaction is not found from kind of like the pleasures of Gorgias, right? The just baseline, monkey brain, neuron activation. But you do have to give something up. And so to me, right, there's kind of two reactions to this state of affairs that are negative. There's either the pure hedonism of, I'm going to work super hard so I can have lots of money to, to blow on, OnlyFans and Uber Eats, and I'm going to jack off 10 times a day, and, I get VR, porn and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I think you see this more so in the like middle to upper middle class, especially like the higher achievers.
Right.
And then on the other end, and not to say you don't see it in the, the other class of society, but it just requires a certain amount of income, and maybe you can substitute that with debt, which, let's be honest, is another version of hedonism. But there's also this.
It's also another version of enslavement to the ones that want to
Definitely, it's
to weaken and rule us. Yeah, because I often talk about the global financial usury network that seeks to not own businesses for profit, but to control.
No, 100%. You're completely right. And one of the other things is that there's this kind of, hedonism and nihilism are kind of bound up with each other, because there are people, I think, who see the hollowness in it all. But when there's nothing to kind of fill that void, because hedonism really is empty. And I think we all know that kind of feeling of, PNC, where essentially, it's like you've done whatever your, debaucherous act is, and you're sitting there and you're like, you feel empty and gross because it is an empty act. And that doesn't mean that all pleasure is bad, but there's kind of a seed of nihilism in that. Like, is this all that there is? And if
I went through that a lot too, being younger. Like I have not always been the based creature I am now. For many years, I drank deeply of the degenerate hedonism that was presented to me. And that's one of the reasons why I know what a flawed, destructive path that is, because I saw what it was doing to me. And now I've spent the last many, many years of my life trying to get people to make better choices and speak against those evils. It's one of the reasons why I was ran out of the city I was in and why I lost my career.
Well, and I think that if we can be honest about it, we're all kind of in that same boat, because for so many of us, even if you live in, one of the good areas, red state, conservative background, like so many of these premises are kind of smuggled into everything we interact with, not even explicitly, but the music you listen to, the movies you watch, the books you read, it's all there. And so all of us, I think, have an experience with this at one degree or another. And so it's no shock that especially the people who in any, normal situation, we'd hope to be kind of the, the leading lights, the guys on the right side of the bell curve, so to speak. Like, there's just rampant nihilism, because for so many people, it is a pointless game. Like, given the information they have, like, what really is the point of it? And so the question is, well, really, like, okay, well, what provides you meaning? And so really, like, I think that's the real question here, is like, well, what provides you meaning? And I think that on the right, we have this general line of thinking, which is that, there are like this rich tapestry of things that kind of gave humans, meaning in life. And obviously, like, okay, religion, country, your locality, your family. And we can debate like the rank ordering of those things or how to bring them back. But I think that, many of us look around and basically say, like, well, we went wrong somewhere. That this kind of idea that, that our current form of, technocratic liberal democracy is the best that we could ever be, and that the only path is, forward in this direction. I think that, all of us have kind of realized, like, wait a minute, we can't keep doing this. We're making people.
Especially after the 1970s, when mass migration began. Like, there's resources are finite. And one of the harshest realizations I came to was that people who are culturally and racially different from us have a very low percentage chance of ever adapting to us and being part of us when they arrive in such massive numbers, on top of the propaganda that teaches them that we owe them something and they should hate us. And that was a very hard pill for me to swallow, but in my early 30s, I finally did. And that's what started me down this path. Is there was a big lie that I had to face about the American way, the American dream, democracy, liberalism, et cetera, of, wait a minute, all of this has to be a lie, because the people that are responsible for all of this have to see at the top end what the result of all this has been. People are miserable. Birth rates are in the toilet. There's no cultural identity. People are dividing themselves into racial and ethnic and religious tribes and hating each other. And yet everyone in leadership positions, regardless of what letter comes after their name, always votes for more of the same. And it was a very hard pill for me to swallow. But I think that you're touching on exactly that right now.
Well, and I think that what we're seeing is that there's this in the system of trade-offs, right? There are choices that benefit the average person or exceptional people. And I don't mean exceptional in like a good or bad sense, but just in a difference from the statistical norm sense. And so I think of things like the changes we've seen with the economy specifically as it relates to men or women. Now, I am convinced, right, that there is a small percentage of people who really were, kind of chafing at the bit, wanting to be, high-powered female CEOs. There's a very small percentage of people who really want to do that. So we essentially traded, the happiness of a very few people against this kind of like mass immiseration. And I think we see the same thing with, globalism to a certain extent, that
Mhm.
there's always been these kind of Marco Polo type figures who really are, wanderers who do want to kind of, find new cultures, right? Like there's always the eccentric, noble who goes fully native, right? Like those people
Yeah.
exist. But the problem is you can't dictate a society to those exceptional people. Like you can't run a society like everyone is, the eccentric Victorian gentleman who decides to become a samurai. You
Mhm.
know, you can't do that. I mean, you can, but it creates a bad society. And my point in that is not saying we should, cater to mediocrity, but it's the recognition of the fact that like you can't run a society like everyone is a 140 IQ Harvard graduate, because and this is another one of those, I guess, like uncomfortable realizations, is that people really are different. And even within kind of like a close knit, ethnic or religious or geographic grouping, people are different. And there's this urge, and you see it very strongly in the American progressives. And I mean, from kind of Woodrow Wilson on, that you can change human nature and remake man into something different. So
Yeah.
this is
That's
what
why that's one of the reasons I often say that if you look at this societal issue, it's very clear that the forces of evil or Satan, it is very clear that the the way that things have been shaped and the path that we are on is a godless evil path. I call it satanic. I call it an religion. It's it's like the divine order. It's not just been destroyed; it's been satanically inverted. And I think that the destructors, the intelligent destructors of our society, of our civilization, they knew and understood this in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. Your Marcusas, your Marxists, etc. They understood that to invert the natural order, they had to remove God and put him at the bottom, making religion and God and everyone that cared about those things the laughing stock, the jesters. Then they had to put women above men. They had to put children above parents. And they had to put the uneducated above the educated, the moral beneath the immoral. And we saw all through the early 1900s these people getting their way and shaping society to be the inverted bio-Leninistic mess that has led to where we are today.
Well, and I think one other thing we need to remember in this is that for both the kind of the both ends of bio-Leninism are losing, really. Like this really is the high-low versus middle mechanism, where the high wins, right? They get to play off, the underclass against their possible successors. And so a certain amount of that is human nature, but really, like, it isn't materially helping these people. And I noticed this in college very much, with you could tell the kids who were there because of affirmative action. And to be honest, it didn't really help these kids. Like a lot of them dropped out. Like that's one of the dirty secrets about affirmative action is there's a
Well, it's
really
not a
high
secret to me.
yeah, but I meant to say that in the broader
Oh,
cultural.
I was just being playful. Go on, please.
Yeah, no, is that it's something crazy. Like roughly 30% of kids from certain backgrounds will drop out of school, which is well above what others will. And a large part of it is that, as debased as these institutions are, just fudging the numbers doesn't change reality. All it does is, change the metric you wanted to change on a spreadsheet. And so really this is a perverse system for everyone involved. And obviously I'm not trying to come into this saying like, oh, I can run a society for the benefit of, everyone else, because I think that kind of like out-group focus is kind of toxic, and we've seen that the liberal out-group bias has really destroyed Western society. But there's also something to be said for the fact that essentially everyone benefits from an ordered governance where things are running well, right? Like that's kind of the best system we can hope for. And so this weird, I think that Francis would have called this like anarcho tyranny, where it's like simultaneously we have this incredibly draconian system of laws on the kind of like the middle, right, like the allegedly productive members of society, whereas the kind of like the Untermensch are just being allowed to run free and terrorize everyone. Like this benefits almost no one except for our kind of like horribly evil ruling caste, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we're a little bit off topic there. If I can bring it back to what you said about nihilism, is that I think that what I would offer to someone is the real question of the age is, okay, the traditional paths society would offer to you to provide you with meaning are closed. Your job will not fulfill you. Maybe not ever, but especially not now. Mm-hmm. The socially accepted way to approach relationships will not fulfill you like it would have 100 years ago.
Right.
If you look like you or I, the military is not going to treat you well. Right. Civil service is not going to treat you well. And so if you're looking for a meaningful life, you really are going to have to, one, make sacrifices, and two, you're going to have to look like outside the traditional, I guess, like, or not the traditional, outside the current bounds of society. You're going to have to truly become a dissident. Indeed. And I think there's a lot of over-romanticization of that. There's a lot of things that aren't particularly sexy, that aren't particularly fun, and kind of require you to give something up. Give up respectability, to give up, your time, your money. And so to me, at least, it's like, all right, well, either you take the easy option, in which case, you either end up killing yourself one way or the other, or you end up, kind of broken and shattered at the end, or you essentially like, pick up your cross, and it won't be fun. It won't be easy, but it'll give you meaning. And to me, at least, right, like the option of meaning and an easy life, I don't think is on the table. So to me, right, at least, I see that as a choice. And so that's a very long-winded way to answer your question.
Well, no, that was good. I had hoped that it would lead to some fruitful conversation, and we got some good things out there. Before we move to the last part here, we spoke a lot about the negative and the ugly things that young men are up against today. So to speak positively, then, in the spirit of what we just talked about, that negativity, take a couple of minutes and from your experience as a young man aware of a lot of this, what advice, what things would you say to young men listening right now that they can realize, access, or do against this spiritual mental cancer that they're up against?
Okay, so there are a couple ones, some which will be more popular than others, which is one, don't have online internet politics be your only source of human interaction. Because the rules for online discourse are very different than real life. And the point of being online is not to be online, it's to make a change in the real world. And so Correct. If you look around and look, like I enjoy, obviously, like I'm talking to you, Yiz, I met you. I've never seen you in real life. And that's obviously I have my own internet presence, but
you will one day. We live close to each other.
Yeah, we do. Believe me, I'll make it work.
You'll have to come to my picnic this spring.
I know, that sounds fun. So point being, don't let the internet consume you. So if you can do even little things like, all right, like limiting how much time you spend on a screen every day. So if you have an Apple product, you have a built-in screen time timer. And what I did with my friends is over COVID, we realized we were all spending a ton of time on our phones. And so we basically set ourselves challenges like, all right, it's 3 hours or less this week. It's 2 hours or less. It's an hour or less. And it was, daily postings and shaming if you didn't make it. Another one is to give yourself kind of, because it's hard to say like, okay, give yourself meaning. But there are a bunch of little things you can do. Like for me, I found that like regular strenuous exercise was really good. And look, I get it. It's a surrogate activity. It's not the same as doing something that really matters because all you're doing is, going to a place, and lifting metal several times. But conforming yourself to something and making yourself do something difficult regularly, and it literally doesn't matter what it is, but just setting yourself a repeated task. And I think too is, especially for younger guys, because I've definitely been and I mean, just to some degree, I'm, still a massive loser in certain areas. Like there's a way to get out of that. And that's essentially, you can't be confident, at least in my mind as a man, unless you actually have something to show for it. And so that ability to set goals for yourself and achieve those goals, even if they're small and no one else sees them, you're building your competence and your confidence. And I think that is something that not only gives you meaning, like, oh, I'm accomplishing something. I can do it. I actually like have a certain degree of worth. That's the power process that Kaczynski talks about. But
Indeed.
You are genuinely making yourself into an aristocrat. And obviously cleaning your room does not a king make, but nonetheless, like using, like providing order to chaotic situations, even if it's your own life, to me, that's a good way to create meaning. So that's one, right? To essentially like just basic dad advice. Like the reason I'm saying it is because look, even minor changes I can see, like I'll put it this way. When I dropped out of college, I was really overweight. I was not doing well in school. I didn't have a job. And I'm not meaning to say like I'm perfect now. Like, look, I'm a college educated guy who works, 50 hours a week in a factory, right?
Mhm.
Like not everything's going how I thought it would, but nonetheless, right? Like I, lost the weight. I managed to, find a group of IRL friends, which I think is really important. And one of the other things I'm going to say in that, if you, kind of a piece of advice is find older people and talk to them, like specifically older men if you're a man, because that not only gives you kind of a place to aim yourself towards, like, oh, by this point in my life, I want to be like him, or I don't want to do that. It also gives you a mentor. And so that's really helpful because, and I think that in much the same way that you hear a common refrain on our sides of, read books written before 1945.
Yes.
Obviously the subversion has been around for a while, but older people have been exposed to less of it to a certain degree, at least on their priors. And look, like boomers are boomers. They all have their kind of like silly eccentricities, but you'll learn a lot from that. And you can also learn a lot of skills by, interacting with people who are really good at what they do.
That's
And
another
so,
good reason for the things that you and I do is we can easily expose younger men to sympathetic, understanding, and intelligent older men that are 10 to 20 years older than them that they can really look up to and learn from. And that's one of the things I talked to Red Hawk about when he came on my channel to talk about healthy masculinity is men need that. Men benefit tremendously from having stronger, smarter, slightly older men that they can emulate and learn from. Men really need that. And that's one of the things that the anti-white narrative has stripped away from our society is that framework of men helping younger men climb the ladder, so to speak.
no, definitely. And I think that a lot of this is, and this is also hard, is one of my least favorite things on these circles is when people say things like, oh, it's just cope, like, oh, you're just LARPing. Because obviously, uh, LARPing and cope both exist. There are people who really are playing pretend, and you have to look at the world as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that like the chain of being is broken. And before, you really could just kind of go along to get along because a lot of the thinking had been done for you, right? So I always use the example of birth control, which is, before a relatively recent time, if you had sex, someone got pregnant. Obviously not every time, but like it was
But very
a
regularly,
one-to-one
yes.
correlation.
Right.
And so that really wasn't a choice you had. It's just the way of the world. And not to say that people were, obviously there were bastards, there were affairs. That's basic human stuff. But nonetheless, like that forced you to take something a little more seriously, just because like there was no bubble wrap. That's how it went. Whereas now, that's a decision you can make. And so many of the things that would have just been kind of default positions in life, you now actually have to think about. Instead
Yeah.
of, oh, I don't even know what birth control is. It's now, wait, am I the kind of person that uses birth control? All right, what types? Like, will this affect me? And so the kind of like just idea of doing everything authentically has been broken. You can't do that anymore because just living, as society requires of you, like we've all accepted that's poison. And so, well, all right, that's true for us. And that's definitely true. I say for us, like the Zoomers, it's definitely true for the millennials, true for, I would argue, every generation back to essentially the silent generation, if not a little bit
Yep.
before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, all right, well, that baseline kind of behavior of, oh, I'll just copy what my parents said, or I'll just copy what everyone says, like that doesn't serve you well anymore. So, well, how do you develop a new old behavior? Well, C.S. Lewis talks about this, and he says, well, look, like to make any change, you essentially do have to play pretend at it. Like he talks about it. He's like, look, and he says, like, this is a personal flaw of mine. I don't like children, or at least I didn't used to like children. And I realized, like, I should. It's the right thing to do, but I just don't. And so he's
Right.
like, well, okay, well, how do you fix that? Well, he's like, well, you have to pretend you like children. And so you
And
have
there's a
to
lot
kind
of
of,
wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in the old saying, "Fake it till you make it." That's what we're talking about here. It's like
right.
if you learn from the older men, from the wiser men that you'll hopefully meet through content creators like j.buden, um, that is one of the important things that men all throughout history have done. They want to be great, and so they fake it till they make it. And even if you don't fully make it, well, at least you did something. You improved yourself, and you held yourself to the fire, and you see how far you can go. You test your mettle, and that's very important for young men to do.
Well, and I think the other thing is that, well, what's your alternative? Like it's like, oh, well, you're playing pretend. It's not real. I mean, okay, what are your other options? Like, really? Like, okay, if you have a better option that isn't LARP, that isn't cringe, it's like, we'll find it. And so to me, this brings up one of my least favorite things about online interaction. And I think it really descends from, and look, I'm a fan of anonymity, right? Like none of you guys have ever seen my face because I want to be able to say things that I couldn't say and still, be employable. But nonetheless, it's this idea that you can just lobbing, constant criticism without ever offering anything is, kind of like a valid and useful thing. And that doesn't mean that in every case where you say that's wrong, you have to say, oh, and this is right. I'm not being that dumb. But it's this kind of idea that like, well, I can just never put anything forth. I can just constantly, kind of poke holes. And I think the Distributus calls it the view from nowhere, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, it's constantly this frame of like, oh, well, to be like, well, I mean, to be objective, it's not this or it's not that, this idea that you can just constantly be in this mode of criticism and never actually have to kind of like put something forth. And to me, it's like, well, we're kind of all in this situation where we're casting around for answers and we're looking for answers that, are not easily apparent, because the easily apparent answers of the left, quite obviously, but also on kind of like the Republican kind of like rhino right are very obviously not working. And so to me, like the idea of like, oh, well, it's cringe or it's fake. It's like, well, yeah, but one, what isn't? But two, like, what else do we have? And so to me, at least, it's like it's going to require us to do things that aren't natural. Like that's the whole point, that, our current state of, natural behavior, and heavily put that in heavy scare quotes, is obviously producing terrible results. And if your counter to that is, well, I think it's fine, then well, why are you here in the first place? Like just, go back in the pod.
Exactly. Well, hopefully that was some excellent advice that will inspire all of our listeners, but especially young men, to heed these words of wisdom and make wise, constructive, healthy choices for yourself that will lead you to being a better, stronger person than you were last year, than you were yesterday. So, since we're coming up on the end of our conversation on Corner Club tonight, Mr. Buden, is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with before we talk about your channel and what you do for work, and share your links out here? Is there any particular thing you want to leave people with, maybe a book or some words of wisdom from your mentor?
So sure, I'll give you a book you should read, and I actually did a whole stream on why you should read it. It's All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren, great Southern writer, and essentially the reason I enjoy it so much, other than the fact that the prose is peerless, essentially, is a story of a man who is as cynical, as deracinated, as disconnected from his home and his people, and over the course of it, we see him kind of make peace with his paternal line. We see him make peace with where he's from. And it's not smooth. He doesn't come through it and magically transform into, something else. But I think that if you read it and read it closely, there's a lesson to be taken from that, because like you said, we're all children of the ashes. Like, look, none of us have been untouched by modernity.
Yep.
But the real question is, well, what are you going to do about it? And to me, at least, like the nihilistic option of like, oh, it's all pointless. What's the point in trying? Like, it's pure moral cowardice. Like, I get it. It's not going to be hard. We're not going to do it perfectly, but I mean, even a 1% improvement, it's what's better than nothing. And if better than nothing is really the best you can hope for, I guess it's not dramatic, but
sadly, that's where we're at, though.
it's where we're at,
Yeah.
And so that book is something I'd really recommend, both because it's my favorite book. It's fun to read. It's engaging to read. There's a lot of, fun politics stuff. But also there's if you can kind of read yourself into the main character and see how he transforms, I think there's kind of a roadmap rather laid out to us of how we can make this better, because I really am not black pilled. Like, I think that maybe the next 20 years might be pretty rough. My lifetime might be pretty rough, but like, we're going to make it out of this. It's just a question of when and how long the sucking lasts, I guess.
Amen, brother. And it sounds to me like you're saying that we should keep heart.
I definitely, yeah. Look at that. I totally meant to do that. Obviously, I was just trying to come back to your thesis as a master of rhetoric.
Hey, you're young. You got a lot. You got a lot to learn. You got a lot. You got some big shoes to fill. But I have a feeling you're going to be a great and wonderful voice for our people many years into the future. Thank you for coming on tonight. And before we wrap up and shill your channel, we have a tiny bit of community engagement. We have over on Entropy, we have Drew Perot. For $3 US. Thank you, my friend. He says j.buden is an absolute weapon. So
that guy.
High praise. Yeah. Is it Perot or Parrot? Because it's got double R's, and I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but I would guess Perot.
No idea. I've interacted with him both on my stream and then also in my Twitter DM, so I only know him through text, essentially.
Okay. Well, he has high praise for you, and I couldn't agree more. You're a great man, and I highly encourage my followers to find you. You can find all of Jay's links at j.buden at Linktree, and I'll be putting that link in all of the chats right now for everyone to grab. So before we say our goodbyes and get out of here, why don't you tell people what you do on your channel? Just give them a quick little synopsis of what they can expect from your content creation.
All right. So I host roughly 2 to 3 times a week a show on my YouTube channel live, and that's normally an interview show. It's about an hour long with the names you're familiar with. I've had Liz on, I've had Pete on. Just recently, I had Academic Agent and a host of other people. And that's an hour long.
You've done some of the best interviews with Thomas 777 that you can find online.
I thank you so much. I'm glad that people really like him. My interviews with Thomas, I have, I think, 5 or 6 out now. And normally what I try to do with all my guests, but Thomas in particular, is I try to take them off the beaten path. Like, look, if you want to hear Thomas talk revisionism, you're not going to hear it on my channel, not because I have anything against it, but other people have touched that. Pete has done a great series with him, and it's probably better than what I could do. But nonetheless, if you're looking for
I wouldn't say that. I've
insights,
listened to everything that Pete's done with Thomas, and you're up there.
Well, thank you very much.
You have done great conversations with Thomas, and like you said, you've gotten him to talk about things that you won't hear anywhere else. So kudos to you for that. And
so if I can,
since you're on my channel, I must beg of you, maybe you could have me on to ask me some unorthodox things one day. I would enjoy that.
Definitely. I'm currently booked out for a little bit, but I'd be happy to have you back on. I enjoyed our last conversation, and now that we know each other a little bit better, I kind of always feel like the more times I talk to a guest, the better the conversation gets.
I couldn't agree more.
There's less,
absolutely,
kind of like figuring out how each other speak and communicate. But in addition to being on YouTube, my show, The J.Buden Show, is also on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you normally listen to podcasts. And I have a little bit of a scheme set up where the most recent 10 episodes are available for free, audio only. And then after that, in order to get my backlog as an audio only show, you have to go to my Substack and pay me $5 a month. It's not that much money. It's not that huge of a benefit to you guys, but it's a little bit of a way to to offset the cost of the show. But they will always be available for free on my YouTube channel. In addition to the regular numbered episodes, we also have casual streams where I read an article. I mentioned before, in this stream that I did an article talking about one of my professors. You'll notice that those tend to have horrendous clickbait thumbnails that I enjoy making a lot.
So I've noticed those, and I appreciate them too.
So if you see something that looks a little bit out of place, it's me having fun. And those are a little bit more casual. They tend to run a little longer. But cool. Just recently, I spoke with Prudentialist and Cody Browning, who's been in chat. We did one all about the mainstream shitlibs finally finding out about some of our friends. In addition, my channel has just passed 2,000 subscribers. And so
congratulations, my friend.
Oh, thank you very much. Either this week or early next week, I'll be doing a little bit of celebration stream for both 2,000 and 1,000, because I said I was going to do a celebration for 1,000 and didn't do it. So we're doing a little bit of a double header. And that should be another just kind of like casual call-in stream. I've had a couple of those where I just let, people from the community who are in my Telegram, hop on and talk to me. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. And regardless, we should have a lot of good interviews, coming up. And I really appreciate your time, Yiz.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. And I do deeply appreciate all of our young men who care about building something positive, because I came to racial identity through a very ugly, hostile way. And it led me to the negative element first. And I'm very thankful that I found the white well-being community and other people like you and Pete and all the other guys like Semiagog who speak positively and healthy about ethnic racial identity. And that's what I hope to engender, because I know that going forward, we're going to have a lot of young men who are going to be racially attacked just for how they were born. And I want them to hear voices like yours instead of destructive, villainous voices. And so I deeply appreciate men like you and Prudentialist and all the others in our circle that are giving young men, young white men, healthy, positive vision instead of negative vision for them to play the villain. So thank you again. And with that being said, we're going to wrap it up tonight. Thank you all for listening. Please, for people like me and Jay who speak uncomfortable truths that the eye of Sauron wants to bury, it's difficult for us to grow organically on these channels. Please share them with your friends. Invite others to listen to the streams, not just my channel, but on Jay's and all the other people that I feature on here. The best way that you can help us is just by sharing links personally and inviting people to listen. So with that being said, I hope you all have a blessed week. Keep heart and speak the truth to all who have the ears to hear it. And I'll see you next Monday night for more Discordant Dragons. Thank you again, Jay. Have a great week.
All right. Good night, everyone.